to Mr. Charles Lyon. Charlie, a native of Anton, Iowa, was a member of the Army Air Force's 419th Squadron, 301st Bomb Wing in World War II. Lyon's B-17 Flying Fortress was shot down by German anti-aircraft fire on December 29, 1944, while on a bombing raid of the Innsbruck Railroad's yards, that is, in the railroad yards. The anti-aircraft shell made a direct hit on the loaded bomb bay section of Lyon's B-17 while the plane was cruising at 25,000 feet. The explosion literally blew the crew members out of the aircraft. 4 crew members were killed and 6 survived. Captured by a farmer with a rifle, Lyon spent 6 months in a German prisoner of war camp until liberated in April of 1945 by American soldiers under the command of General George Patton. A lifelong honey producer, Lyon returned to the honey business in Anton following the end of the war. In 1947, Lyon married the former Mary Jo Hoskins, who is with us here today. The couple has 2 children, Kathy of Brookings, South Dakota, who is also with us today, and Jim, who is partnered with his father in the commercial honey business. Let's give a warm Rotary welcome to Charlie.
Well, I thank you for the hospitality, and I hope I don't disappoint you. World War II stories, I'm a little bit hesitant to get into the details of World War II stories, so many people have interesting World War II stories. I have a friend that has a Silver Star. I have another friend that was at Mount Sabachi. He wasn't included in the 4 Marines, but had the picture been enlarged, he would have been. And for me to get up and tell a story, I'm a little bit hesitant. But I was flying out of Foggia, Italy, right across from Naples on the Adriatic Sea. And I was on my 11th mission when I was shot down. My first 5 missions, we started out on nuisance raids, and each squadron would send 1 plane to a different city. My first mission was to Munich for a night mission, and we were up over the Alps, and the pilot said, "I'm in trouble." He said, "I got to go to the bathroom." And the relief tube was back of the bomb bay, and so take the path of the least resistance, he took his steel helmet and used that. And we got up over Munich at 25,000 feet, and the searchlights were up, and the plane lit up like daylight, and it looked like fireworks from shrapnel from that aircraft, and he grabbed his helmet, not thinking of, and needless to say, we had profanity. Anyway, we went on 5 night raids, and after the 5th raid, we went to Munich and Vienna and Stuttgart and Frankfurt, and after the 5th raid, he called us together and he said, "I'll tell you, I'm jeopardizing everybody's life. I'm not cut out for this. My nerves aren't good enough." And he said, "I'm going to ask to be grounded." And he was grounded. And so then I was a fill-in I volunteered trying to get my 35 missions in as soon as possible to get home. So I volunteered to go on missions. Anyone who would go on sick leave, well, I'd fill in. And on my 11th mission, we were going to Innsbruck. And we had reached our IP, our initial point of the bomb run, and we had about 50 miles to go to Innsbruck when we got a direct hit underneath the bomb bay. And I knew we were going down, and the bailout bell didn't ring. It was just in turmoil, and I was trying to get to the escape hatch to bail out, and I had remembered all the training, pulling the red lever, kick the door, get free of the plane before you open the chute. But centrifugal force was taking over, and I couldn't move. And the next thing I knew, I had the sensation I was falling. And fortunately, I had my chest pack on it. And I opened my chute. And after I opened my chute, I could see big pieces of the B-17 spiraling down to the Alps below. we were in the area of the Dolomites, which are some of the more ragged peaks of the Alps. And I'd flown over them before and often thought, my goodness, what would it be to land to have your chute snag on a pinnacle? You know, there's no way you could, you know. And that's just where I was coming down, over some of the real jagged peaks. But fortunately, the wind caught me and kind of pulled me over into the timber line. And as I was coming down, I could see a little village down in the valley, and I could see 3 other parachutes, and they were drifting down toward this little village. I landed in the pine tree way up in the upper elevations of the Alps, the 29th of December. And snow was up to my waist. I went into shock. I didn't realize what shock was as a young boy, but I was blind. And I eventually got my senses, and I got to swinging along and got up so I could take the weight off my harness and slide down the tree. Well, during this time, I got down in the snow, and I took my Mae West off, and my life preserver buried it in snow, and I was bleeding. I don't know what I did that for, but I did. And in briefing, they always said our odds were pretty good if we landed in the Alps, that Marshal Tito's partisans were so active in the area. And I was hoping that somebody would be around to help me. But as it got, that was high noon, and I was up there for hours, and I was getting almost into hypothermia. And I thought, well, before I die up here, I'll wander on down to this little village, which is several miles down. About that time, a farmer came along with a rifle, and he motioned for me to get up. And so I put my hands up. He took me down to a little house in the mountains, and took me out the barn and checked me for any weapon and brought me in the house. And can I have a little sip of water, sir? Thank you. And in the house were 3 little girls sitting around the table, and they offered me lunch and some berry sauce and were quite hospitable. And I got my escape kit out, which was in my flying suit and sealed. It had 48 American dollars, little maps of everything in detail so you could try to identify the terrain, and a hacksaw blade, halzone tablets to purify water, 48 American dollars to bride with, and I got my maps out, and the farmer turned up the lamp, and I kept pointing around where was I at. I knew I had to either be in Austria or northern Italy or Yugoslavia, western Yugoslavia, but he pointed to the little town of Brixen, Italy, which is the second town south of the Brenner Pass, just right almost on the Italian-Austrian border, and we were only 50 miles from Innsbruck. So I looked at the map, and there's only 50 miles, approximately, you know, and you're just less than an inch over to the Swiss border. So I kept pointing to Switzerland. You know, I was hoping that maybe he'd get me over into Switzerland. And he put me in a feather-tick bed that night, and I had a good night's sleep, I guess, fairly well. Next morning, I got up and started turning the churn for the farmer's wife. I thought, well, maybe they're going to help me get to Switzerland. And shortly, the Wehrmacht soldier came in, the Hitler Youth Boy. They had their big weapons, and they were ready to take the American, and they loaded me on a sled and took me down to the German headquarters. And nobody could speak English. One guy said doctor or medic, and I had the head wound and the teeth gone, knocked out. And so he took me to a German doctor, and I saw my bombardier and my navigator's flying suit. And there were masses of blood. And the German doctor could speak English beautifully. It was just wonderful. And he visited with me. He said, "You're a very lucky boy." And he said, "I should x-ray your leg, but I don't have an x-ray." And so I ended up being shuffled from army area to army area till I ended up in Bolzano. And that was German headquarters. And a big fancy mahogany desk and a general and terrazzo floor and everything that you'd imagine in German headquarters. And I waited to go in to be interviewed, and my leg was bothering me so much I didn't stand at attention every time an officer went by. So I thought one time I'd set it out. And a German soldier grabbed me and banged me against the wall and hollered, "Achtung!" I had to stand attention. And I eventually got into the general's office. And I believe, I can't document it, but I believe from watching an educational channel that it was this General Kissling that was the head of the German command. And he wrote down murder and underlined it, and he swung me around. All I had on was my old flying jacket. And eventually I ended up in a German army truck going up through the mountains. And then they put me on a train, and I started up into Munich. And as we got up into Munich, on the way to Munich, American P-51s came down and started to stray from the train. And they were so low, everybody evacuated the train in a hurry, and I was with a German guard behind a tree. And he said, "The Amerikanische Fliegers are no good. That's the American flyers are no good." And they were low enough that I could see the pilots as they were machine gunning the train. And eventually, after an hour or so delay, they got the train going, and they took me to Munich. And I stayed in the train all night in the marshalling yards in Munich. And I had bombed the marshalling yards twice, so I wasn't real comfortable spending the night there. And I eventually ended up at Frankfurt, and I went through interrogation at Frankfurt, and they gave me a shower and little wooden clouds. And I thought, well, this isn't going to be too bad. They took me up to a German officer, and his tablecloth was made out of the silk maps from escape kits. And he said, "You bailed out over German-held territory in the United States and dropping spies all over Germany. You got to identify yourself as an American flyer." And of course, I'd been name, rank, and serial number, and I gave name, rank, and serial number. The big German soldier came and kicked my butt and threw me into solitary confinement. I was in solitary confinement for 13 days. And they'd let you go to the bathroom, but never when anybody else, so you could never compare notes with anybody. And I eventually got out of solitary confinement and ended up at Nuremberg. And Nuremberg was an old RAF prisoner of war camp. It was filled with RAF flyers and some Americans. And as I was there, my tooth and jaw, I got abscessed. And I could feel this tooth, and I thought with my tongue it was broken off. And a British captain said, "Oh no," he said, "we got to do something." He said, "I'll get a hold of Kraut and we'll get a pair of pliers." And so he got a pair of pliers, and he got a hold of my tooth, and instead of the tooth being broken off, it was driven up in my gum. And of course it drained, and the winter was bitter cold, and we started taking the slats out of our beds and making bonfires to keep warm. And eventually we ended up all sleeping on the floor. Well, in February, the U.S. Air Force came over and I would imagine a 1,000-plane raid and just absolutely destroyed Nuremberg. And that night the RAF did it. And the next day the U.S. Air Force was over it. And the city of Nuremberg was just total ruin. Well, then it was shattering the windows in our prison camp. And the guys were out digging trenches to try to get underground, but the shrapnel was coming down like rain, from anti-aircraft. And we started hearing explosions. And the pessimist said, "Oh, that's just nothing but bombing in the distance." And the optimist said, "Oh, no, that's too constant. That's artillery." And the Americans had crossed the Rhine, and they were closing in on Nuremberg. And so they said, "Well, we're going to march you down into the Alps. If we get you down into the Alps, we can hold out and we'll get a negotiated settlement." So we started marching out of Nuremberg to Moosburg, which Moosburg is about 40 miles north and east of Munich. It's 160 kilometers. And we'd been living on 750 calories a day, which wasn't much food. We were weak. And the same thing again. The first day out, down comes B-51 strafing us. And some of the men did get wounded and were taken to the hospital. But I got behind the tree again and was a survivor. And we'd stay in German farms at night. And we'd sleep in the timbers. And we got in one German farm, and I was with a boy from Pennsylvania that spoke Russian. And they had forced labor women doing the farm work. And he got to visit with one of the Russian girls, and she was thrilled to have somebody talk Russian. So we were sleeping in the haymow in the barn, and he said, she told me to come on over and see her. And he said, I'm going over. And so he left me, and to be absolutely honest with you, when you're living on 750 calories, your sex drive is 0. Absolutely, I will confirm that. And it obviously was, because he came back in about a half hour, and he said, look what I got. And he had 10 eggs. And we went out, started a little campfire, and there were tin cans, and we had scrambled eggs. He said, she wanted me to spend the night, but I got the eggs. I got the hell out. So we ended up from down at Mooseburg, and there were 40,000 American prisoners at Mooseburg, which was the largest POW camp, I think, in Germany. They had evacuated so many camps, and they were down in the foothills of the Alps. And they were Russians, French, Americans, Poles, English, and I was there, and, well, let me back up 1 minute. When I was at Nuremberg, the only time we got any news from the outside world was when new prisoners would come in. And a young boy, all-American boy, about 6 foot, 180 pounds, with a blonde-haired boy with a crew cut, all-American boy. And I got visiting with him. I said, well, what bomb group? He said, well, 301st Bomb Group. That was my bomb group. I said, well, what squadron? He said, 419th Squadron. That was my squadron. So I said, well, what 10? And he said, 1026B. And that was my 10. So I said, what bed? And he said, the second bed to the right. You're not Lyons. And I said, yes, I am. He said, I took your bed. I said, how many missions did you get? Just one. He said, first mission. He said, I visited with your brother the other day when they were gathering your personal belongings. My brother was flying 10 miles away in a B-24 outfit. And we'd get together quite frequently, and he was there when they were gathering my personal belongings. And I think it was quite an unusual situation to find the man that took my bed, and he was on his first mission. And so we ended up down at Mooseburg, and we were sleeping in big tents. And we started hearing the same thing we heard at Nuremberg, the artillery. And the night of April 29th, the German guards were leaving the prison camp, and we were on our own. The next morning, the 14th Armored Division came in with tanks by the dozens and dozens of tanks, and went up and down, knocked the guard towers down, and threw us K rations in, and it was a real treat to have K rations. And so I went to town, and up comes General Patton in a command car. And his son-in-law was at Mooseburg, interned at Mooseburg. I got to briefly shake his hand as he came into the camp. And so I went to town, and of course a half track was there, and the guy said, soldiers were giving me souvenirs, which that's practically where I got them all from, the guys that the daggers and different things. Anyway, they loaded me down with souvenirs they had, and I rode in the back of a half track into town. And Mooseburg was a town of maybe 50,000. And as we got into town, SS were still fighting in the outskirts of the town. And one of the guy driving the half track said, well, there's a good souvenir for you. And here was the Nazi flag over the city hall. So I went up the spiral staircase and got the Nazi flag over the city hall. And shortly, a couple of years ago, somebody had written Dear Abby, and said the most memorable thing in his life was being at Camp 7A at Mooseburg when Patton came in, and he said seeing a skinny little American shinning up a pole, taking down the Nazi flag and running up the Stars and Stripes. And I was right there. I mean, I didn't go up the pole, and I don't have the flag, but I do have the flag that was over the city hall. And so I wrote Dear Abby a letter, but I didn't mail it from Anthony. I didn't want him to think I was having marital problems. It said that I wrote Dear Abby and said that I don't have the flag, that was over the prison camp, but I do have a flag that was over the city hall. And so I was liberated there, and they flew in old C-47s and flew us out to Camp Lucky Strike outside of Paris. And everybody had lice, and they deloused us and gave us new clothes. And so I said, well, I want to keep my flying jacket. And the guy said, well, for Guy's sake, get rid of it. He said, everybody will want to keep something. So I got my old flying jacket that I slept in and lived in all the time I was prisoner of war. I threw it in the bag. It may have German lice in it yet, but it's still. So then then I want to touch just a little bit on the rest of the crew there. My navigator, when the plane blew up, the navigator is still alive, and he lives in Cheshire, Connecticut. And when the plane blew up, he had a chute on, but at 25,000 feet, he was unconscious, obviously, or he didn't regain consciousness. And he fell to 25,000 feet and landed on a mountain slope on 5 foot of snow and survived. He's been a master, and he's still alive back in Connecticut. And the bombardier, or the co-pilot, when the plane blew up, he was falling in the debris. And a parachute hit him right side of the head. He said, any port in a storm, I need to shoot bad. And he snapped the chute on when he was coming down. And I've got the story, and it's all documented. And in fact, I've got the old World War II Stars and Stripes that tell the story of my navigator. And so that pretty well concludes my war story. I hope I didn't bore anybody. Then one more little word that I thoroughly enjoyed. A year ago, during August, a family that owned the land where my plane crashed, the community got together and went through the archives and tracked down my crew and the 4 that died. They had buried 3 of them, but one of them they never found, of my crew. And so they organized a deal. A B-24 also crashed a half-mile away, and all 12 died on that, and 4 of mine, so that would be 16 out of 22 had died. And they put up 2 monuments for each one plane and the names of the dead, and put it up in northern by Brixton, Italy. If you're ever going down the Audubon south of the Brenner Pass, and in the Brixton area with binoculars, you can see the 2 crosses that are up with their names of the American dead. And I went over there in August, and the 3 little girls that I'd had breakfast with, that had been little girls when their dad captured me, were there, and they are now 60 years old. But they had the whole story down right to a T. And the mother, the farmer's wife, is still alive, and I visited with her. And I thoroughly enjoyed going back, and my pilot and I went back together, took our wives. So that's my story.